This is National 9 News with...
A fierce hailstorm in Melbourne's outer eastern suburbs this afternoon has left a path of destruction. Golf ball-sized chunks of ice shattered windscreens and dented cars as a band of rough weather passed through about 3:30. Most of the damage was suffered in Lilydale, where residents were forced to take refuge. A nursery took a pounding while the SES was swamped with
wild weather in hard-hit Melbourne suburbs overnight. Severe thunderstorms have brought floods and extensive damage to a lot of homes. State Emergency Service volunteers have responded to hundreds of calls. And for an update now, we're joined by Today reporter Nick McCallum. Morning, Nick. Did these storms come out of the blue, or was there some warning?
Well, Steve, there were forecasts of thunderstorms, but nothing like this. The storm hit Melbourne's northern and eastern suburbs just after midnight and basically followed the Eastern Freeway, right the way into the city. Now, Steve, 120 millimetres fell in a couple of hours. The Weather Bureau says that's a 1 in 50 or 60-year event.
Nick, tell us about the damage. How extensive, how widespread has it been?
Well, it's fairly widespread, as I say, right throughout the northern and eastern suburbs. But here in the Eastern Freeway, there was water, Steve, up to chest deep under several bridges. Now, the Fire Brigade's Marine Response Unit had to get out 2 boats, 2 rubber duckies, and rescue about a dozen people underneath this particular bridge we're standing on, the Bulleen Road Bridge. Now, the people were wet, they were cold, they were quite amazed, but they were checked out by ambulance officers and okay. At this stage, the good news is there have been no reports of serious injuries, Steve.
And Nick, I'm hearing that Lilydale did it tough overnight.
Yes, Lilydale received basically 2 batches of very heavy hailstorms. The old cliche, Steve, there were hailstorms the size of golf balls, hit not just once, but twice at Lilydale. Now, Steve, we don't actually live very far from here, and I've got to tell you, my entire family was woken up by the storm last night. There was an amazing lightning display as well, and it was very, very scary indeed.
How are emergency personnel coping this morning?
Well, they've received so far, the State Emergency Service has received so far around 1,000 calls. Now, they say around 400 of them is in one particular area, inner city area of Northcote. They have around about 250 volunteers currently out in the field at the moment. They say the most damage is to roofs and to actual walls of buildings. The flash flooding, which occurred right throughout the city, is subsiding pretty well at the moment.
And Nick, what effect is this going to have on morning peak hour?
Well, Steve, you can just imagine the Eastern Freeway where we are now is blocked between 2 major intersections, Doncaster Road and Bulleen Road. That's a couple of kilometres, and that is filled with hundreds of thousands of cars, typically every peak hour. So it's going to be chaotic. No word yet on when it's actually going to be opened again.
And just quickly, the weather now, it looks overcast and cloudy. Are there more storms on the way?
If you can believe it, Steve, there are more storms forecast. It's going to be 29 degrees, but they're already talking about more thunderstorms in the southeast of Melbourne, in the Frankston-Pakenham area late this.
First at 5, 10 News with Max Butcher and Jennifer Hansen.
Tonight, Melbourne's storm of the century. Wild weather leaves a multi-million-dollar trail of destruction.
Surveying the damage, Premier Bracks promises financial support for victims.
And looting shame. Brazen thieves prey on stunned shopkeepers.
I think we just don't know what to do first, you know. It's before Christmas. That's right.
Also tonight, tales of heroism from the suburbs, and we'll cross live for the latest on the massive clean-up.
But first, as we go to air tonight, more storm drama is unfolding. A golfer has been struck by lightning north of Melbourne. The man in his 50s was hit while he was on the 6th hole of the Seymour golf course. A lightning bolt struck him in the head before exiting through his foot. The victim suffered severe burns and has been airlifted to the Alfred Hospital in a serious condition.
And now with the latest on this afternoon's storms, we cross to our weatherman, Mike Larkin in Thornbury. So, Mike, can you tell us what's happening as we speak?
Well, thunderstorms have been brewing for the last couple of hours, but the good news, they have for the most part eased off before reaching Melbourne, and for the most part have actually become rain depressions. But as we saw just a moment ago, there has been severe thunderstorms north of Melbourne. We have a look at the radar. You can see that the thunderstorm cells have got relatively close to Melbourne. Places like Gisborne, Whittlesea and also Hillsville copying a little bit of wet weather out of that. It is continuing to move east-southeastwards, these thunderstorm cells, and it looks like that may continue to be the case the next hour or so, remaining unsettled, in other words.
So, Mike, is the storm system following a similar pattern to yesterday's?
Well, it is to a degree because of hot, humid winds moving down from the northwest, but the thunderstorms won't be nearly as intense as they were last night, and also they are moving a little quicker, so therefore you won't see quite a few hours of lightning and thunder like you did last night, and therefore with the thunderstorms moving, the rain won't be nearly as intense. But still, with that in mind, a severe thunderstorm warning does remain in place for much of Victoria and the metropolitan area of Melbourne. I'll have all the weather details in full for tonight and tomorrow, and we'll also look at all the charts at 5:55, Jen.
Thank you, Mike. And as Mike said, we'll cross back to Mike Larkin for more later in the bulletin.
As the latest storms hit, Melbourne is counting the cost of last night's onslaught, described as a once-in-a-century deluge. Along with lightning, thunder and hail, some suburbs were swamped by flash flooding.
It looks like a car that's ended up in a river, but it's actually a flood which has taken over a freeway. The Eastern Freeway turned into a floodway by a once-in-a-century storm, dumping around 3 times the average monthly rainfall in less than a couple of hours. Rescue crews patrolling outbound lanes in outboards, the uncharted waters providing a new hazard.
The dangers we have to come across is the drops in the road. We don't know where the deep drops in the road are, so we've got to put our life jackets on and just treat every step carefully.
9 people were stranded under the Thompsons Road Bridge. Aside from mild cases of hypothermia, all escaped injury.
Very, very exciting. This is a story I can tell my grandkids, I think.
The massive deluge also took its toll on other roads. Emergency services stretched to the limit. The lucky motorists were able to look after themselves, others beyond help.
At one stage we had a report that there was 80 cars stuck at this intersection here, and there's still a number of cars stuck here at the moment.
For some, it was impossible to find refuge, car interiors holding more water than radiators. Emergency services responding to more than 1,400 calls for help. Every available SES unit was activated, concentrating on the hardest hit areas of Northcote, Preston, Doncaster and Nunawading. Homes and businesses flooded by an unrelenting barrage of rain and large hail.
It was almost like a bomb going off, the whole building shook. It was very, very frightening.
Some residents waking to find clothes and furnishings floating out the door, helpless to deal with the damage until the rain and hail eased.
In parts of Melbourne will have exceeded the monthly average easily. You're looking at 40 and 50 millimetres as being average totals. Places have had 120 millimetres, so they've exceeded that by a factor of 2 or 3.
Come daylight, the Yarra River was swollen and seething with dangerous debris. A barge in the city broke its mooring and became jammed under the Spencer Street Bridge. With a torrent breaking its banks, Dights Falls was a no-go zone. Greens and bunkers on golf courses in Balwyn and Kew becoming large-scale water hazards. A delayed start to the peak hour run on the Eastern Freeway, water giving way to a flood of desperate drivers. Cameron Bowe, 10 News.
And it was a double blow for Fairfield shopkeepers, looters, making off with stock as torrential water devastated the main street.
The flash flood hit Fairfield shopping strip around 1 a.m. 100 millimetres of rain falling in just 50 minutes. The downpour created a wall of water which rushed down Station Street, leaving a path of destruction in its wake.
It was pretty frightening, actually, seeing the water. The water was like waves coming down the street.
There's not one shop that hasn't been affected. Everyone. It just looks like there's a metre of water through the whole street and just gone through every shop.
Cars were swamped and shop windows burst. A watermark more than a metre high, proof of the torrential downpour.
Everything's finished. Complete, nothing left, nothing stopped. No fridge is working.
While some stunned shopkeepers surveyed the damage in disbelief, others rolled up their sleeves and began the massive clean-up. A few finding it difficult to get past the front door to assess their losses. This devastating flood couldn't have come at a worse time for Fairfield shopkeepers. With Christmas just a few weeks away, their busiest and most lucrative time of the year has been literally washed away.
That's the thing, we just don't know what to do first, you know.
Just before Christmas. Trying to get fridges and motors done this time of year going into Christmas is going to be very difficult.
And in a further blow, police have arrested a Northcote couple in their 30s for looting. It's alleged the pair made off with goods from a chemist and delicatessen, which had floated onto the street at the height of the flood.
Well, that's the time, to pinch it. No one here, people pinch it.
Just mongrels, You'd like to get 10 minutes with them just to fix them up.
The cost of the clean-up and lost Christmas revenue could top $1 million. Gerard Sholton, 10 News.
Remarkable rescue tales have also emerged. One man heading to help his girlfriend battle flooding had to be saved himself. The East Kew taxi driver became trapped in his car, submerged in raging waters up to the roofline.
Lucky to be alive, Gary Rothschild inspects his waterlogged car that so easily could have become his coffin.
He finally managed to kick in the back window and he pulled me and I swam out at the same time.
Eternally indebted to the SES crew that pulled him to safety, the 49-year-old taxi driver is recovering after his vehicle was submerged in water up to the roofline.
The thought did cross my mind that, hey, this could be it. I'm going to drown here now.
Volunteer Glenn Taylor proved his saviour, wading out to the car, securing it with rope before managing to smash a rear window.
The gentleman basically was in a position where his head was tilted back. There was only about 200 to 300 mil of space between the water level and the roof.
Mr Rothschild says his experience should serve as a lesson to other motorists that cars and floods don't mix. Ironically, he was on his way to help his girlfriend whose home was being flooded when tragedy struck. He wasn't the only driver caught out. Anthony Molinaro scrambling onto the roof of his Volvo, steering it like a surfboard after it became swept up in the swirling waters.
Paddled my car from my roof with my leg towards the gate, jumped over the gate.
As for Mr Rothschild, he's just thankful to be alive.
Thanks, guys.
Alan Ruskell, 10 News.
Still some thunderstorms about, and please, if you have animals, make sure those pets do come inside because those dogs especially freak out when they hear thunder or see lightning. I'll see you tomorrow night. Max, Jennifer?
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. And that's 10 News for this Wednesday night.
Updates throughout the evening, the late news at 10:45. For now, take care.
Good night.
Good night.
This is National 9 News with Joe Hall.
Looters bring a distressing new dimension to the misery left by Melbourne's storms of the century. Good evening. Residents of many parts of Melbourne are clearing up after the fiercest storms in living memory tore through overnight, leaving behind a massive damage bill and hundreds of disrupted lives. This is how the Weather Bureau's radar plotted the passage of the spectacular thunderstorms and the deluge that accompanied them, starting just after midnight. Matt Dowling begins our coverage.
A spectacular light show over Melbourne last night was a grim warning of what was to come. 2 hours and more than 100 millimetres of rain later, many parts of the city's eastern and northern suburbs were underwater after what's been described as a once-in-a-century storm. Motorists were among the most vulnerable as the floodwaters seemingly rose from nowhere, leaving hundreds stranded.
How long have you been there for?
Couple of hours.
Couple of hours.
The Eastern Freeway was the worst hit, with some sections cut off and several people trapped in their cars.
When we got here, we found approximately 12 cars scattered across the freeway in deep water and about 8 to 9 people trapped under the bridge, unable to escape.
The freeway becoming a waterway as the fire brigade used rubber dinghies to ferry people to safety.
Yes, it's very different. Very, very exciting. This is a story I can tell my grandkids.
As we said, this was a once-in-a-100-year storm. So what caused it? That's the big question. And more importantly, is there more to come? Here's 7 News meteorologist David Brown.
Peter, look, I've never seen anything like it. I was up during the early hours of the morning shoveling ice off my roof, trying to stop the flooding. Look, the hail was absolutely massive.
From the 7 News team, good night.